I don't think Checo can recover from any of this, and other people are starting to realise this, even his sponsors. And there is more to this than just me talking about it. There are plenty of other reasons I am happy to share with you. And also, this might be an opportunity for Red Bull to fix things with the public and give Daniel Ricciardo one last ride. I can assure you that this video isn't a take based off of me being British or anything like that. I have receipts that are headed for the conclusion that the further behind Checo is starting to wear thin somewhat, even with the Mexican media, as well as the organisers of the Grand Prix itself. There's also the matter about the financial benefits that Red Bull might receive, allegedly, if they were to retain Checo for at least the rest of the season, and throughout the extension that Christian Horner and he negotiated earlier in the year. But now things have gotten so murky that makes me think that might have now been brought into question, because as far as Christian Horner's concerned, he's not exactly sure about what's going to happen with Sergio after the Brazilian Grand Prix this weekend. Wow, are we looking that closely to Checo being dropped? I think that might be a little bit hasty, but still, the vagueness from Christian, that's a new one. Because if there's anything he's sure of, it's the confidence that he has in Perez, and that's suddenly gone. But I need to keep assuring you that this is not a topic which I am discussing on a whim. There are some key indicators which are pointing towards things looking less rosy for Sergio than they did this time last year. Of course, Helmut Marko's comments in 2023 were quite immense in terms of impact and damage on the Mexican's composure, but he was able to bounce back from it last year, and he did enough, especially at Interlagos last year, to make sure that he retained second place in the championship and thwarted any chance of Lewis Hamilton trying to give Mercedes a nice little bit of comfort from a year which was very much a case of soul-searching and yet another concept change. But I think you can easily say that Sergio this year is a lot more composed than he was last year. He seems more in control and a little bit more confident and defiant. But even he is admitting that this year has been a terrible season. He's made no bones about it, but it's certainly not dented his overall morale. And according to GP Blog, even the local media outlets after the Mexico Grand Prix commented that this weekend was Checo's worst home Grand Prix. Even worse, arguably, than the 2 times he didn't even finish the race. Even worse than last year's Turn 1 exit. And they also go on to point out, this is the Mexican media talking about, this isn't me bringing it up, is that not counting those 2 DNFs, this is the first Mexico City Grand Prix that Checo has been part of, has classified, and has not scored a single point. That is a very major issue, and that is something that even the local journalists are not mincing their words about. And another outlet commented that the only good thing about the race for Checo is that it finished, and he finished last. Now, to be fair, the reason why this is a pointed topic for discussion is got something to do with Liam Lawson. What became clear over the Mexico Grand Prix weekend is that there is most likely a lot of internal tension going on behind the curtain within the Red Bull Racing Group, especially with VCARB in the picture. It's understandable when you think about it. Liam Lawson is in the second race of his second tenure with the sister team of Red Bull. And last year, the capacity of Liam's presence in Formula 1 was different. There, he was a substitute getting his big break, kind of like what Franco Colapinto is doing this year with Williams. This year, though, his life is on the line when it comes to his long-term Formula 1 future, so things matter a lot more, and therefore, he is going to be hustling even more than he did at the back end of last year. The circumstances of his presence in the sport are totally different. He's keen to make an impression and perhaps take Checo's job in the fullness of time. For Checo, he would have expected and hoped to not be going toe-to-toe with the Kiwi, and instead would have wanted Lawson to help or not get in the way as he was being lapped, but that wasn't the case here. Instead, we got what we got. They were arguing amongst themselves, there were dive bombs exchanged, there was damage had, heated exchanges on the radio and out of the car. It was just a complete and utter mess, and it really ruined any chances of Checo trying to fight back into the points. And all of this at a time where both teams need as many points as possible. I'm not talking about just Red Bull's bid to try and get back to at least second place in the Constructors. I'm talking about VCARB's situation where they're trying to get back 6th from Haas. Now be honest with me, 6 months ago, could you have imagined Haas being in contention for 6th place and maybe even troubling 5th place in the fullness of time if they keep up this rate of scoring? But also, both teams have to do what they can to try and take points away from McLaren and Lando Norris. And as a result of their spat, Checo was neutralised and Liam was a factor in all of that. And it really didn't help that he had a clash with Colapinto, which resulted in him getting damage of his own. At least there was a crumb of comfort that he took away the fastest lap point from Norris. And I would argue that throughout that entire weekend, it was probably the worst weekend that Red Bull as a group ever had. At least with the Hungarian Grand Prix, there were some bits of consolation for one of their drivers. Here though, nah, not so much. Although Horner was doing his best to support his driver and conducted an unorthodox press conference to showcase telemetry, which hoped to exonerate Verstappen's 20-second penalties and show that the FIA was being unfair. Most speculating that this was a pointed protest against the governing body and the stewards, and they weren't choosing to bother their time with an appeal that wouldn't have gone anywhere. You know, this kind of seems right. This is Christian going to the court of public opinion, laying their cards on the table and going, there you go, everyone. There's our information. There's our evidence. We know that we were right, and we're not even going to bother with the FIA. They're going to ignore us. So yeah, do what you do best, internet, and let rip in the comments. So yeah, that was a clear display that they were backing Max Verstappen absolutely wholesale. But when it comes to the support and feedback regarding Checo, Horner was nowhere near as flattering. And this just makes me think that if the interviews were true earlier in the year, that maybe they might need a stronger drink than just going around Christian Horner's kitchen table and having a coffee or a drink of tea. I think they might need something stronger than that, if it happens at all. And with support starting to dwindle potentially with the team, most would have speculated that Carlos Slim, one of Checo's prime backers throughout his F1 career and then some, would come in and sweeten the deal with Red Bull to help maybe retain the driver. Well, the billionaire has reportedly come in, but not to the direct benefit of Red Bull necessarily. According to reports, Telmex will most likely not be extending their sponsoring of the team into the future. Final talks are yet to have taken place. At the moment, their only association with Red Bull would be with Sergio Perez. The personal relationship that they have with the driver, that's not going anywhere according to Telmex. That's not even up for debate. They are going to continue their support wherever he goes, be it with another team in Formula One, or maybe to pastures new. Maybe he might just become a brand ambassador for the rest of his life or something like that. That's not in doubt. But the thing is, though, is that many people have speculated about the reasoning why Red Bull kept him around was the financial benefits and perks to be had with all of the Mexican sponsors that were adorned on the RB20. With that going away, maybe Red Bull might be less receptive in keeping Sergio around and giving him more time to try and turn things around. I think it's quite obvious that the journey we have been on regarding the contract of Sergio Perez with Red Bull has been a bizarre and bumpy one. An earlier than expected extension, a sudden about-face after the Belgian Grand Prix when all the optics were pointed toward Daniel Ricciardo getting a chance and called up to steady the constructors' battle, the consensus was that money had something to do with that decision because I think even Max and Daniel thought the deal was done. Again, I have to make it absolutely clear. I am not saying that Sergio Perez is the worst driver in Formula One history, as many other publications are pointing out. No, he has proven time and time again that he has been worthy of his long and storied career in Formula One. He has had so many good moments. He has been known as the tyre whisperer. He has given so much glory to that of Force India and then Racing Point. At times when that team looked like they were going under, Sergio was right there as a cornerstone, a key motivator. He has proven worthy of being a solid driver in any motorsport lineup. Absolutely. People thinking in 2011 when he showed up, he was just a simple pay driver with Mexican sponsors, just simply there for Sauber to keep afloat after BMW abandoned them in 2010. No, he proved to be more than enough in terms of gaining them points in 2012. That was a fantastic season for Sergio, going toe-to-toe with Alonso in Malaysia. I will not forget that race. That was remarkable. And while he has been at Red Bull, he just basically got out of the way of Max Verstappen and allowed him to do his thing without friction. Except for some incidences in 2022, which got very awkward in Interlagos of that year. And it helped steady the ship when it came to the lack of primed and ready junior drivers, which have manifested itself in the wake of both Gasly and then Albon not cutting the mustard for them. And again, when it comes to the situation and the reports regarding the relationship that Telmex might be having with Red Bull, and that might be coming to an end because Red Bull have now started to get into bed with a contract extension with AT&T, another telecoms operator, maybe this might be Christian Horner just sounding off that, hey, we're starting to wean ourselves off of the teat of Mexican sponsorship money and now starting to weigh up our options, because the rhetoric coming out of this weekend is probably the most negative I have heard regarding Sergio, at least this year. This is just Christian not mincing his words at all, saying that Checo had a horrible weekend. There was no bones about it. This is a far cry from the Australian Grand Prix where Checo was 5th and people thinking that that might have been for him falling off, and then Christian comes to his defense saying, oh no, Checo was absolutely fine, yeah, no, it was floor damage, that's why he was 5th. That might have been the case, but after that, things started to get rockier for Sergio. But either way, Christian's comments do make for grim reading, and that's taking out of the sponsorship money issue, and yeah, this is what he's had to say. You know, there comes a point in time that difficult decisions have to be made. We're now 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. Our determination is to try and get back into a winning position, but it's going to be a tall order over these next 4 races. Perez's weekend was horrible. He knows Formula One is a results-based business, and inevitably, when you're not delivering then, the spotlight is firmly on you. As a team, we need both cars scoring points, and that's the nature of Formula One. We're working with him as hard as we can to try and support him, and I think we've done everything that we can to support Checo, and we'll continue to do so in Brazil next weekend. But there comes a point in time that you can only do so much. I'm also imagining Christian pulling off the Riker maneuver on a chair when saying that first part of the quote. And yeah, in all seriousness though, the support of the team is probably starting to seep away with the drop to 3rd in the team standings, something that really matters to Horner. And it really shows little signs of having a plucky response in time to stop Ferrari and McLaren running away with it. And this is right in the middle of the situation in the aftermath of the Austin upgrades. Back in Austin, it looked like there might have been some hope for these upgrades. The do-or-die maneuver of Red Bull to try and turn things around and respond to McLaren, and now Ferrari. But in Mexico, it proved to not be quite as good, with Verstappen saying that these are not good enough and the team needs to do more. It didn't help that he lost time on Friday in terms of building a race setup, and then he was justifying his aggressive actions against Lando Norris, saying, I have to drive the way I drove to make sure I can get anything out of the car. The team needs to do more. We're going to be probably seeing more and more of this if Red Bull cannot come up with a solution to their upgrades where it allows Max to drive a little bit more calmly and allow the car to do the talking, and make sure that Lando Norris stays right behind him. If it doesn't, then we're going to be seeing more of what we saw in Austin and Mexico in the last 4 races. Which will be absolutely great in terms of the championship narrative and TV figures. In terms of our tickers, it's not going to do them any favours at all. What also doesn't help Sergio is that the long-held belief was that if he were no longer in F1, ticket sales for the Mexico City Grand Prix would fall drastically, and that the track organisers would be in dire straits. Well, turns out that might not be the case. ESPN reports that the head of the track organisers, Alejandro Soberon, stated that whilst Checo is a national hero and has been instrumental in the track's continued presence on the calendar since it arrived in 2015, he also stated that fans were coming because they simply loved Formula One. These are his full comments for you, by the way, so you can actually get the full context about why Checo might not be as necessary as people believed. We're fairly optimistic that we were going to have a race for many, many years. What I can tell you is the Mexican crowd, the fandom, is very strong for F1 in general. Obviously, Checo is a great enhancement for this, but Mexico has been very close to the heart of F1. We have a much better show on track today to what we had 5 years ago. I think competition and quality of the spectacle at the track is going to be enough to sustain the interest of the crowd, so we as a promoter of the race, we're very excited trying to figure out a way to extend our contract regardless of Checo. There's very few races who have a local driver. This year we have enjoyed in general, in F1 sold-out crowds everywhere, and that's a reflection of the competition and the quality of the show. Everybody of course would love to have a local driver, but the first year we did the race here, 50% of the fans were in a red t-shirt, so Ferrari has a wonderful following here. I leave you with some small arithmetics. We have no more capacity. We could have drawn 600,000 if we had unlimited capacity. We could have another 200,000 here, but we cannot put them, as in there's nowhere to put them, safely. Probably without Checo, maybe a drop of 20-25% naturally, but still, would be a sellout. And I think he's right, we would miss the Mexico City Grand Prix. It's been a fixture, and especially the fact that the mariachi version of the F1 theme is even a thing. I love it when it comes on, and I love it's still continued to be a part of the coverage of this weekend's race. And whilst I respect Sergio's stronger resolve this year when compared to last year, and defiantly going to his critics saying that he's not leaving, his confidence about his future is absolutely rock solid, the factors surrounding his maintained tenure with Red Bull are becoming less solid. And I'm pretty sure that whilst people would be sad to see no longer Checo in the sport, I think it's also safe to say that people are starting to realise that maybe the party is over for Sergio, that this year was definitely his worst one at this Grand Prix, and even the local newspapers were saying this, that There was no way of sugarcoating this. There was nothing they could do except just point the finger at Liam Lawson. And yes, of course, he has ruffled some feathers, but he certainly made an impact. But I will tell you one thing for sure, is that in the Spanish-speaking world, Lawson is public enemy number one right now. But probably what helped save the pain is the comments that Soberon mentioned that Ferrari has a strong presence in Mexico. And seeing Carlos Sainz win the Grand Prix, the story behind it, people reckoning that this might be the last time Carlos wins, Sainz saying that he wanted to win one more Grand Prix with Ferrari this year after he won in Australia. This was an absolute fairy tale moment that happened in Mexico. It's going to go down in history, and Checo really had nothing to do with it, except some really awkward exchanges and middle fingers being pointed out. So what does Red Bull do? Well, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see Sergio being dumped this year, and he will start next year with the team since he does have a contract in place. And I can also imagine that cutting off his contract earlier than expected, even with those supposed performance clauses in hand, would be a very expensive affair. And what might help Checo's case is that the two closest potential replacements that are younger than him might not be quite ready yet, nor might Red Bull want to have a conversation regarding them. There's Yuki Tsunoda right there, and as far as I'm concerned, he deserves a chance because he's done the time. And even if it's just 1 year, the final year of the Red Bull-Honda relationship before they then start their relationship with Ford and the Red Bull powertrains thing comes fully online, just give Yuki that chance to prove himself against Max and maybe get a couple of podiums and become the most successful Japanese driver in F1 history. But clearly, that conversation is something that Red Bull does not want to have, stonewalling the issue until Honda just goes away and then the problem goes away in of itself. Then, of course, there's Liam Lawson, people thinking that, yeah, he'll be put into Red Bull next year or he'll be the next in line to have a chance against Verstappen and help him out. But I think what's become quite clear is that he is quite the hustler. He has put some noses out of joint, which is good in terms of making an impression and being memorable. But even Helmut Marko, one of his biggest champions, said that what he was doing was a bit above and crossing the line, that he needs to have a sit down with Liam and Checo to sort things out, and that middle finger thing was completely unnecessary and there is some refinement to be had. So there's a little bit more time Liam needs before he can be ready to be in the same car as Max, because if he showed that same tenacity and absolute aggression when Verstappen's in play, yeah, that needs to be worked on. So eventually, in a year or two, but right now in 2024, up to Red Bull Racing, nah. No. As much as I would like to see Red Bull not do anything rash and axe Checo before the start of 2025, because he might regroup over the winter, you never know, I can also see the team maybe calling in an old friend for one last waltz with them, and that would be Daniel Ricciardo. Now, I can understand why you might be wary about this, and I myself reckon that this probably won't happen. It seems absolutely too perfect and too romantic in terms of a narrative, in terms of it being ripped out of a film or something like that, that Daniel gets one last chance with Red Bull to try and mend the wrongs that happened during the Singapore Grand Prix, give him a proper send-off, one of them, of course, being in Las Vegas, an American track, where lots of people that were upset that they didn't get to see him in Austin might make the journey to Las Vegas, or at least be happy that he gets to at least drive around an American track one last time in Formula One. But it is a point worthy of discussion. It's quite obvious that the Red Bull Group are regretting their handling of the Singapore Grand Prix and its presentation of Ricciardo's departure, it barely existing. It was a completely haphazard situation and disrespectful for the tenure he'd put into the team, as well as the impact Ricciardo has made to F1's global image and its influence, and his deep involvement with Drive to Survive in aiding it becoming such a big behemoth that it is in terms of culture, in motorsport especially. And yes, I fully acknowledge and respect the fact that he is not the same driver as he was in his heyday, and he made some really bad decisions when it comes to moving teams at the wrong time or the wrong place and what have you. I think Red Bull doesn't really have anything to lose at this point. If they keep Checo, then okay, fair enough. He might turn things around, he might redeem himself, he might get back in touch with the front and prevent Ferrari from running away with second place in the Constructors and still be in the hunt for the top spot if something really bad goes wrong with those other two teams. But maybe with Daniel Ricciardo, it might be a way to patch things up between he and Horner, because Horner has said that there'll always be a place for Daniel within the Red Bull family, and many people speculated that, oh, sure, okay, is that a media day, or there's promotional events where he gets to drive an old car around a city for a couple of hours or something like that, or maybe he shows up at Goodwood driving classic cars or something for Red Bull. I mean, that's all very well and good. I'm sure Daniel won't mind that. And he might get a chance to realise his dream, albeit for just 3 races. That might be enough for him, just to have a proper goodbye. And maybe having some part in at least Red Bull trying to get its season back on its feet with at least both of its cars having a chance of being in the top 5 or something. Again, I don't see this happening, but it is an idea worth talking about. I think that realistically, Checo is safe for the rest of this year, and I think he'll be safe for at least the flyaway races of 2025. If it turns out that the winter had not been kind to him in giving him the answer, the RB21 has not kicked on, and it's just as problematic and everyone else has kicked on further, or is just as fast, then there might have to be questions asked, and maybe Red Bull might be more willing to go back to its cutthroaty ways and have a discussion in going like, yeah, no, we've given him as much time possible. Liam, you're up. I think if Daniel got to be in the RB20 in Abu Dhabi one last time, it would be a better way for him to call time on the sport instead of being clouded in ambiguity and a fastest lap and being part of the discussion of the fastest lap no longer being a thing. It's worth thinking about. And again, I think Red Bull, what have they got to lose, really? It's not like Mercedes is about to take 3rd place in the constructors from them, right? In closing, Sergio Perez's support from expected sources is being tested, and Red Bull might be bracing themselves in terms of cutting ties. His future with them is murkier than ever, and even though right now there are no talks of his contract being torn to shreds or anything like that, next year, if the winds don't change in his favour, and he's right up there with Verstappen for the beginning races before we head to Europe, then I think they might have to have a sit down and have a talk. One thing's for sure right now, Checo is not justifying Red Bull activating the option for 2026. That, I think, is a little bit more certain. And if the reports regarding his sponsors cutting ties with Red Bull Racing are to be believed, then that might accelerate the process, that the team might not feel compelled to keep him around for that little bit longer, and that the narrative that was expected by the drivers and the team in Spa might be manifested just a little bit later than anticipated. Look, I'm trying to be fair here, and I think Checo deserves to see the season out. That's the case. But as many people have said, including a certain Formula One world champion, cash is king. And if that cash isn't there, then the king might no longer be around. And as a result of this lack of form from Checo, even at tracks that he was expected to be good at, it's given Lando Norris an opportunity to go after Max head-on without his teammate getting in the way. Has the Brit come on leaps and bounds this year? And to find out why I think this year has been very critical in terms of Lando's continued professional development in Formula One, go and watch this video next. Even if nothing comes about from this year, next year will be a lot better for him. Watch out.